So I was doing some little calculating. This Wednesday will be my 45th Christmas, right? Which means, according to my kids, I'm super old. And but there's definitely other signs as well that I'm getting super old. Sign number one is that the Christmas traditions that we have set up for ourselves, right, are becoming ever more meaningful. Which means that if any of my kids try to skip out on them, then I'm a little bit more sensitive about that. So kids, if you try to skip out on the Christmas traditions that your parents have set up for you, and your mom or your dad kind of shoots you a look like, no, you're not skipping out, that's why, right? It's because for some reason, as you get older, those traditions become more and more meaningful. Number two, I'm getting more excited about seeing my kids get gifts and my wife get gifts than I am about actually receiving gifts. You remember when you were a kid, it was all about what's next, right? Give me the next package, right? And if it was socks, okay, just throw that to the side, give me the next one, right? Because my parents did that to me one year. They just gave me a bunch of socks. I was mad. But I didn't hurt for socks. Third, it doesn't matter how small the gift is or how inexpensive the gift is. If my kids made it, took time to wrap it, and give it to me, it's priceless, right? Like that, I know. I'm like, okay, now I know that feeling of when I gave my dad that really junky-looking box, and he shed a little tear, right? I knew, I was just trying to do something. But I was like, man, I didn't expect that reaction, right? It was because, hey, I took time to do it. So kids, it doesn't matter how much you spend, right? Just do something. Mom and Dad love it. But speaking of gifts, that may be one of the greatest signs of how ancient I am, right? Is because I just so happen to know of some gifts that my wife, who's probably watching because she and all the kids, they had to leave early after small group this morning, headed down to a family Christmas in South Alabama. So they're probably watching online. Hey, honey. I know about the gift, right? A gift that I'm really excited that I'm getting for my wife this year. Don't laugh. Beef jerky and sweatpants, right? Man, I'm so excited. If you find me in about 3 hours, I will be rocking those sweatpants, right? Because I know where they are. I'm just going to go ahead and break them out of the package, okay? And so, yeah, so that's another sign that who gets excited about beef jerky and sweatpants? This guy, right? Okay, and yeah, some of y'all, and I'm noticing, okay, thank you. Okay, you brought down the age range. I appreciate that. Okay, yeah, okay, thank you for that. Some of y'all young folks, I really appreciate y'all making us old people feel really good. But to me, there's nothing that says dad of 7 kids from Alabama like beef jerky and sweatpants, right, as a Christmas gift. But a final sign, right, that something is probably a little bit more serious and significant. I've noticed, a little bit more gracious in areas that I used to be a lot more opinionated. A few weeks ago, I told you that the church that I actually came to Agape from, so a little church in Abbeville, Alabama, called First Baptist Church, Abbeville, Alabama, they experienced a fire that destroyed their educational space that was built in the 60s and their sanctuary that was built in 1905. And one of the pieces of their sanctuary that people were most saddened about losing was the stained glass windows. It was this big ornate, First Baptist Church sanctuary. And so I remember when I got there in 2008 as a youth pastor, I got a new to me camera, used like digital SLR. And I went in there and I started taking pictures of the stained glass windows. And so these are some of the pictures that I got. And it was the midday. They were absolutely beautiful the way the light was coming in. That was the baptism of Jesus there. I think that's the Jesus healing the blind man. And that's the Last Supper. That was like what I would be looking at as I would preach. Huge window there in the back. I think that one may still be standing. But then there's Jesus knocking on the door as the Good Shepherd. And then there's the angel visiting the shepherds there in the field that we'll talk about here in Matthew chapter 2 in a moment. If you want to open your Bibles there in Matthew chapter 2. But here's what I was opinionated about, because I met the guy who did the stained glass windows, and I was like, and you know, maybe this is a good test for us. When a few minutes ago, when Brian asked you to imagine yourself being in Bethlehem the night that Jesus was born, when you closed your eyes and you actually pictured Joseph and Mary and the wise men and Jesus, what did they look like? Did they look like you, or did they look like how they actually looked, like Middle Eastern Jews, right? Very dark skin, pronounced features on the face, or did they look like maybe the Sunday school version that you grew up with? Or did they look like this, where it's, because I joked with the guy who made the windows, I was like, I don't remember the white-skinned, red-headed Jesus, and I'm not sure that's culturally accurate, It seems maybe it's a little far-fetched for me. I read the descriptions of John the Baptist, and I'm not exactly sure that he looked like a hippie from the '60s there in California, or if you look at the angel there, I'm not sure she was rocking the tight afro that looks kind of reddish there with the very white skin. And he didn't like that too much after he'd spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, on the stained glass. But now I understand all cultures do this, right? One of the things my wife has done as we've gone to so many nations around the world is she's collected nativity scenes. And I even listened to a podcast on this past week. Nativity scenes all throughout the world reflect the culture that nativity scene was created in. So you have nativity scenes from other cultures that bring in those cultural elements. They picture Jesus as one of them, just like the guy who did the stained glass did it, And so it's not really cultural appropriation. It's not racism, right? There's something about the Christmas story and about the message of the Christmas story that invites us in to see someone, or to see Jesus as someone like us. Someone that we can draw near to. Somebody that we can identify with and relate to and trust in. You see, on Wednesday night, we talked about how God revealed the good news of Jesus' birth to the shepherds and the angels. And today we're going to read about God revealing the birth of Jesus to kings from the east, or wise men, these rulers and authorities we call the Magi. And the question for today is, why did God reveal the good news to them? Why did God reveal the good news to them? If God has the power that he has, he sent an angel to actually speak out the words to the shepherds. Why not do the same thing for the Magi? Why not send an angelic proclamation to them to give them specifics? Why did God do it the way that he did? And why shepherds? And why angels? Why not Herod? And why not the scribes and the people who are studying the Old Testament there in Jerusalem? There's lots of questions that we should be asking about the Christmas story, about the biblical story at Christmas. And the fact that we don't ask these questions just kind of shows how we've gotten too familiar with it. And we need to be asking these questions. And so, how did they know to look for the star and follow the star? Was it just that boring in ancient times that they were like, hey, there's a star, let's go trek out and follow it, And so, these are fun questions that we get to ask about the Christmas story, and y'all know I love questions. So, let's set out on this little adventure this morning in Matthew chapter 2. And so, I'm going to read the first couple verses, and then we'll look at some of the witnesses that God gave them, and some of them might surprise you. And guys up there in the sound booth, y'all always do a great job, and y'all have already done it. Thank y'all for putting the slides on the back screen. I appreciate it. Okay, so Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. And so, one of the things that you're gonna hear next year as we trek through the Bible is you're going to hear why there are 4 different gospel accounts. Matthew, as I think I've told you before, was one of the disciples of Jesus. He had a Jewish lineage. He was a Jew himself. And he was writing his gospel as an evangelistic witness to the Jews, showing that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And so all throughout his account there in the Gospel of Matthew, he has Old Testament references, right? He has all of these Old Testament references to show the people that are reading his letter that Jesus is this Jewish Messiah, that he's the one that they've been waiting for. And so he is going to he's going to help his readers understand Jesus is fulfilling prophecy even before he was able to speak. He's fulfilling prophecy even at his birth. And so one of the ways that he fulfilled prophecy is that these wise men or these rulers or these magi came to worship him. But once again, how did they get there? Well, what I see in this text is that God gave them 3 witnesses. God gave them 3 witnesses so that the Magi could go from where they were, which was somewhere in Persia, right, to there in the cave or the stable there by the manger. And so the first witness that they have was a cosmological witness. This is the first witness. And so these wise men from the east are literally Magi. If you look in the text, the word, if we had just maybe you've heard the word Magi, it's because that's the word in the Greek text. We kind of translate it the way that we do to say wise men, but there are some translations that use Magi. And so what word do you see when you look at the word Magi? Magic. Yeah. You see magic. Okay? So don't think Houdini, don't think David Copperfield, right? Okay? Don't think they're showing up pulling rabbits out of the hat, and the rabbit's holding the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right? Think of those who dealt with the spiritual, supernatural, and metaphysical realities there in their cultures. Because once again, they were not cultures of science. They were spiritual cultures. They were cultures that recognized that there was something beyond the physical, but they were just grasping, right? They didn't have the specificity and the clarity that we have. There was a Bible commentator named Keener. He says, Magi were astrologers from the royal court of the king of Persia. So this is why we sometimes call them kings. They were rulers. They were in authority because they were from the royal court. And we're really not given a further description on what this star was, right? We might want to ask that question, what exactly was this star? Was that an angel in the sky? Was it the same angel that the shepherds saw? We really don't know. It just says star, so we take it to be star. But one of the references to the Old Testament that I think is going to come into play later on is from Numbers chapter 24:17. It's one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. Y'all remember the story of Balaam, right? And you remember Balaam, he was hired to go and give a false prophecy against Israel. And on the way to the false prophecy, y'all remember he had a little animal trouble. He got in trouble, probably would have gotten in trouble with PETA if it was today. But since they didn't have PETA, something else happened, right? You remember what happened? Y'all remember? Anybody? What happened? The donkey talked to him, right? Right. The donkey was like, hey, I hadn't done anything to you, right? Balaam's like, just keep going, keep going. The donkey saw an angel on the path because the angel of the Lord was preventing Balaam from going to curse Israel. And so the donkey saw the angel. Balaam didn't see the angel. And so Balaam starts beating the donkey. And God opens the mouth of the donkey. And he actually talks to Balaam and says, hey, why are you doing this to me? I've done nothing unkind to you. And at that point, Balaam's like, okay, well, today's going to be an interesting day, I guess, right? Well, Balaam, he ends up making it, and in just a total act of God's sovereignty, Balaam opens his mouth to speak curses, and he can't speak curses, he can only speak blessings. And one of the blessings he speaks is Numbers chapter 24:17, that a star shall rise out of Jacob. Now you think, that's in Numbers. That's what we call the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So this is in the very early days of Israel when they're wandering in the wilderness. So these 5 books would have traveled all throughout the Old Testament, right? They traveled all throughout the kingdoms of Israel, traveled all throughout the monarchy with David and Solomon, and then when the monarchy split. And I think that's significant because there was a star that the Magi knew to follow, which is pretty incredible that they followed the star. But how did they know to do that? Well, I think there's a second witness here. It's a second witness. And this witness is not, the first witness is a cosmological witness. The second witness is a personal witness. God, you see, this personal witness was obviously an individual. Now, if you know the story of the Old Testament, and if you don't know the story of the Old Testament, once again, next year, Lord willing, you will, as we go through every book of the Bible and you get this big picture story of the plot line of the Bible, creation, fall, redemption, restoration, you learn how all the stories fit together. That's the goal of our next year and the next sermon series we do next year, right? And so, as the kingdom of Israel, as they split, they were each conquered by other kingdoms. And they took the best and the brightest of Israel and they exiled them. And that's where you get the stories of like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel in the lion's den. You get the story of Esther, right? All of these really, really incredible, amazing stories about what God is doing among the Jews as they are among the nations, right? Some of the Jews God called back home, as in Ezra and Nehemiah. They came back and they rebuilt the wall and they rebuilt the temple, right? But then other Jews, God called them to stay. And as God called them to stay, God started doing incredible things, like Daniel being saved from the lion's den. And as Daniel's saved from the lion's den, and as Daniel, it shows that he is a man of character there in Babylon where he is. Look at Daniel 2:48 on the screen. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him the ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Well, guess what that word wise men is? It's the same word for wise men in Matthew chapter 2. So Daniel was the chief Magi. And so I wonder where they learned to follow the star. Well, if you've ever read the book of Daniel, man, Daniel saw some incredible stuff, right? He had some incredible visions, and it's probably likely that we don't have all the visions that Daniel saw, but it is very likely that Daniel recorded them, and as the chief Magi, those pagan magicians, those pagan Magi, now were studying the prophecies from what we call the Old Testament, the early prophecies, the oracles of Balaam, and then they were also studying about how one day this star would rise. And one day, as they're astrologers, because they're looking for these stars, they see this star that's unique above all other stars. It rises, and they say, that's the one. That's the one Daniel was talking about, right? And so God gave them a personal witness, the chief Magi from generations before, for them to follow. Okay, now let's go back to Matthew chapter 2 and look at verse 3. So when Herod the king heard this, right, about what the Magi came when they said to him, so they arrive in Jerusalem, and it says that when the Magi told him that the king was being born, Herod's like, I'm the king. I beg to differ, right? It says he was troubled and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So the first witness was a cosmological witness, a star. The second witness is a personal historical witness, right, that told the Magi to be looking for the star. But now this third witness is a biblical witness. Herod gathers the chief priests and the scribes to inquire where this Messiah would be born. And one of the many glorious things that we're going to learn next year is that the Bible tells one story. God creates everything that's very good. Humans are in a relationship with God, but sin separates them from God and throws the created world into chaos, and God is very quick to proclaim victory in the face of defeat. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, the first prophecy of a coming, wounded, but victorious warrior is given. And then throughout the rest of the Old Testament, God reveals more and more about this individual who is eventually called Messiah, including where he would be born. Micah chapter 5, verse 2, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days." Why does Matthew quote this? Why does Matthew record this event? Because the biblical testimony from the prophets, the scribes, those who study the Old Testament, they knew the Messiah was going to be born here. They knew this was the testimony of the Old Testament. And so God had left them a witness. And so the Magi had the final piece of the puzzle. They could have just kept following the star, but Matthew, wanting the people there, wanting his readers to know that Jesus is indeed the Jewish Messiah, says they received the final piece of the puzzle from the man who would eventually go on to try to kill that baby Jesus. So 3 witnesses: a star, a person, and Scripture. A cosmological witness, a personal witness, and a biblical witness. For what? All to get the Magi, who represent the pagan nations, to the side of Jesus. For the shepherds, it was just the angelic proclamation in the fields near Bethlehem. But for the Magi, these 3 witnesses. What does it mean? These are the questions we get to ask at Christmas. These 3 witnesses, I persuade you today, show God's desire and God's design to fulfill the vision of Genesis 12, Philippians 2, Revelation 4, and Revelation 7. If you're unfamiliar with these chapters, I would encourage you to write these down and to go read them this afternoon. These 4 chapters all describe the ultimate vision of the nations returning to give glory to God and being under the rule and reign of Christ. You've sung about it today. You've sung about it from people who understood this from old. Joy to the World, the Lord has come, was written as a song about the second coming of Jesus, not the first coming, but we sing it about the first. Come, Jesus, come is not about the first coming of Jesus, it's about the second coming of Jesus. Why do we rightfully combine the two? Because the first testifies to the second. If he has come once, he is coming again. We recognize that. We embraced that a few weeks ago. But why the delay? Why today, when you show up a few days before Christmas, do we have all this talk about missions and missionaries and giving money so that other people can hear the gospel? Why this talk about the nations? Well, I hope today you've seen it's not that far-fetched from the Christmas story itself, is it? This is one of the reasons I love being a Southern Baptist, is because this is one place where I feel like we've gotten it right when it comes to missions. Missions goes hand in hand with the Christmas story. Look at what God did to bring the pagan nations to the very side of his Son at his birth. 3 witnesses: a cosmological witness, a personal witness, and a biblical witness. It shows the desire of God to bring the nations to himself so that every knee can bow and every tongue can confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. But I didn't just say it was his desire. I said it was also his design. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, he's showing us a pattern. If that was the way that he brought the nations to the Messiah's side in the nativity, then I think those 3 witnesses also serve to give us confidence that we can go boldly to proclaim the gospel to the nations as we embrace that as our task here today as well. We also bear witness in 3 different ways. First of all, we recognize that there's a cosmological witness. Y'all remember Romans chapter 1 all those years ago, right? All those years ago, we talked about Romans chapter 1 and the fact that the creation testifies about the invisible attributes and the divine power of God, that when people look at creation, they can't deny that there's a creator. They look at all that's around them and they say, this is just too amazing to be coincidental, right? I mean, for the people in here, we got one over here, this beautiful sleeping baby over here. It doesn't just happen, right? There's a beautiful design in this process. And if there's a beautiful design in a personal process and a personal child, then it can't all be by accident. There's a cosmological witness that testifies to the glory of the Creator. But that is just general revelation. You need something specific. You need something personal. And that is why, you remember Romans chapter 10? Just a few years ago, right? How will they hear without someone preaching to them? How will they hear without those beautiful feet bringing the gospel? Because faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. And so we're called to be that personal witness, to go and to take the gospel to the nations, to take the gospel to our neighbors, to take the gospel to those who need it. Because if Jesus had not come himself, if Jesus had not entered into our brokenness, we would not be saved. And if we don't choose to be faithful and obedient and enter into the brokenness of others and open our mouth and proclaim the good news of Jesus, then how will they be saved? That's what Romans 10 presents us with. But Paul doesn't want you to think that it's all manufactured from within. You don't have to worry about your own eloquence because there's a third witness. Remember a cosmological witness, general revelation, creation? A personal witness, that's you, that's the messenger. But then 3, a biblical witness, Romans 1:16. Y'all remember Romans 1:16 all those years ago, right? I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto the salvation of everyone who believes. It's not about your eloquence. Friends, just go tell them the words of Scripture. Go tell them the Christmas story. Go tell them about Jesus. Just open your mouth and trust that the Spirit of God, who is the Spirit of truth, is going to use your testimony to help them see how good He is. This is how beautiful God's desire and God's design is for us to take the gospel to the nations just as somebody brought the gospel to us. You see, the message in all of this is simple. God sent Jesus as a lowly king in a manger to be honored and revered by the Magi, because one day all nations will bow and everyone will declare that He is king. And so we've been doing this little thing during the invitation time here in this season. We've been summing up the invitation into 3 areas of response, right? These are 3 ways that you can respond in every invitation, but specifically in these invitations. Think of it in terms of head and heart and hand. Head, heart, and hand. Head, and what have you heard today that you need to believe? Heart, what attitude or motivation needs to change? Hands, what is God calling you to do? And so what could it be today? What have you heard that you need to believe today? Well, you need to believe today 2 things. Jesus came for people just like you. But then you need to believe something else. Jesus didn't just come for people like you. Man, that's a critical thing to believe, isn't it? Jesus came for people just like you. You need to identify with Him. You need to believe that He came for people just like you. But He didn't just come for people just like you. He came for every tribe and every tongue and every nation, for all the people who look differently than you, that speak different languages. And we have a stewardship, we have a responsibility. We need to believe that that is our stewardship and our responsibility to take the gospel to the nations and to give so that other people can go if we're not called to go ourselves. What about heart, though? Well, you see, the Magi brought gifts fit for a king. And so what gift do we need to bring? I don't know if he's here today, but I need to apologize to Steve Moore. Steve Moore was like, Ryan, if y'all could just somehow fit Little Drummer Boy into the Christmas season. Oh, it'd be awesome. And Steve, if you're here, I'm so sorry. We didn't get around. But that's that whole point of that song, right? I have no gift, pa-rum-pa-pum-pum, But the whole spirit of that song is what I have, I'll give, right? And any mama knows, don't bring a drummer on my baby, right? If my baby's sleeping, get that drum away from me, right? But still, The attitude, the motivation of the heart is this, right? Romans 12:1. What is Jesus worthy of? My complete surrender. Everything. I'm not going to hold anything back. And so, what are you holding back? He's told you what's fit for a king. And so hold nothing back. Hands. Does my commitment to take the gospel to those around me and to take the gospel to the nations reflect the heart of God that I've seen today? What about His commitment to get the gospel to me? Spared no expense. You see, all the feels that you get around Christmas, all the vibes, I think that's the right use of the word, right? All the aura. I don't know. Is that? I think that's the Gen Alpha version of it. It's all meant for a purpose, right? That's another way I know I'm getting old, is because maybe it's the whole tempus fugit, time is fleeting kind of thing. Is that I know that the time we have, that tomorrow is not guaranteed. And so all the Christmas season, all the things we celebrate, all the truths that we rejoice in, all the songs that we sing, all the times that we gather, it's all pressing us towards something, right? And like Brian said earlier, it's not ultimately about the gifts. It's not ultimately about the experiences. It's not ultimately about the trips that we take. It's not ultimately even about the family, because there's going to be drama there, and this person's not coming this year, or this person's not going to be there this year. There's always some kind of tinge of something there that taints it, right? And so there's got to be more. There's got to be something more. And I don't know what it is for you, because the fact of the matter is that God has a different purpose for every one of you in here. So that's not my responsibility. My call for you is this: just fix your eyes on Jesus in this season and look to surrender everything to Him, and He'll show you what that next step is. He'll show you what that purpose is. He'll bring clarity where you need clarity. And as your faith, I heard somebody say it this week, and it was really good. It was somebody who was coming out of a background of addiction, and I was talking to them about how they live their life, coming out of addiction, hearing about that victory. And they said, I notice it's a pattern in my life, is that the times of my life where I'm fine in a good way is the times where I'm faithful to what God's called me to do. When I'm fine, I'm faithful. It's because I'm faithful. And so will you be faithful today? Knowing that whatever's coming this week, whatever's on the horizon for you, God's going to lead you, because He promised to never leave you or